Hi, I'm Nicole Dyer from ABC Gold Coast and the proud ambassador of Gold Coast Open House. We hope you enjoy this recording from our 2022 Open House Talks program.
Welcome to the Gold Coast Open House 2022. My name is Amy Degenhardt, and I'm honoured to be representing our sponsor, the Australian Institute of Architects, as its Queensland chapter president this evening. Open House is a worldwide network of cities with the aim to engage the general public in dialogue with architects through the promotion of architecture and design in their city. The goal of Gold Coast Open House is to communicate the process of placemaking and highlight the range of professionals involved in the creation of the amazing places, spaces, and buildings within our incredible city of the Gold Coast. Open House is a non-for-profit organisation and relies solely on volunteers and sponsors. Please support Gold Coast Open House by volunteering and sharing your experience on social media and with friends. I'd like to now do an acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, Gold Coast Open House acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past, present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Gold Coast Open House is very pleased to be working in partnership with the Australian Institute of Architects. Guided by and just saying a few words about the Australian Institute of Architects, guided by our vision of ensuring that everyone benefits from good architects, we represent over 13,000 members globally and are committed to demonstration of the value of architecture to the public, while strengthening our profession and the practice of architecture. Along with our members, we are dedicated to improving our built environment and the communities we call home by promoting quality, responsible, sustainable design and advocating on behalf of the profession for the benefit of all Australians. The Institute are very pleased to support this event, as one of the main responsibilities of the architectural profession is to provide leadership. And this topic, designing livable houses for life, future-proofing homes that will adapt to our changing needs, is important to all of our futures. I know that the discussions will be quite inspirational, and there'll be further opportunity for conversations later on. So please join us for a complimentary drink post-presentation, and that way you can investigate and interrogate this subject further through some lively engagement with each other. So what I would now like to do is to introduce our moderator and also our panel. So let me just switch to those details. And then pretty soon I can shut up and let these guys get on with the show. But let me say that these guys are pretty amazing, and there's a little bit of stuff on each of them, and I'm just going to go through that. So have a little bit of patience with me yet. So first of all, our moderator, Alison McDonald. She is a neuroarchitectural consultant at Griffith Inclusive Futures, Griffith University. Alison is an architect, neuroarchitecture consultant with the Beehive Brain and Enriched Environments Lab, already right? A research and industry fellow with Menzies Health Institute, the city's research institute, and ambassador with the Hopkins Center for the Rehabilitation and Resilience, Griffith University. Alison strives to create change for inclusivity and equity through design of cognitively accessible, sustainable built environments. Alison's academic research, international industry experience as a multi-award-winning architect and sustainable design consultant provide a platform for informed change. She explores social sustainability and implementation of inclusive architecture with the goal of creating cognitive, enriching environments for all. Welcome, Alison. Barry Lee, Principal Architect and Director of Dark Horse Studio. Hi, Barry. Barry Lee, architect, recently established his new practice, the Dark Horse Studio. Over his career since graduating from the University of South Australia with first-class honours, Barry has been responsible for the design of projects throughout Australia, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and the Pacific. He has led the design of more than 50 significant high-rise buildings, including landmark Gold Coast buildings, the Wave, Q1, Sol, Circle and Cavill, Oracle, Sabano, and Jewel. Now, if anyone in this room hasn't been in one of his buildings, I'd be surprised. Barry Lee's current studio practice reflects his deep commitments to service. Throughout his career, he has volunteered on a number of community, charity, and local government boards, and has assisted in the founding of charities and independent schools. He is currently a director of the homelessness charity Common Ground Gold Coast. Next, we have Coral Gillette, and she is a design researcher at the Hopkins Center, Research for Rehabilitation and Resilience. Welcome, Coral. Coral Gillette is based at Griffith University, where she is a researcher at the Hopkins Center for Translational Research about Rehabilitation and Disability. Coral is focused on the intersection of disability and built environment and engaging people with disabilities in the design process. She holds a Bachelor of Built Environment, Interior Design, and a Master's of Design Futures. Aside from her research role, she has industry experience in commercial interior design, project management, and practice management. Next, we have John Moynihan. Welcome, John. Sustainability consultant, Passive House Design Certified Designer, Director and Director of Ecolateral. John Moynihan is a director of a well-established building sustainability consultancy, Ecolateral, and more recently, co-director of Air Tightness Testing Services Australia. His combination of skills as a Passive House certified designer, educator, builder, environmental consultant, Living Houses Australia assessor, and level 2 air tightness tester give him a unique perspective on working within the design process to resolve performance issues. He has been an advocate and champion for more environmentally conscious communities over 3 decades. Through his work in Australia and Europe, John has been recognised and honoured by government, building associations, and academia alike. John was a recipient of the Queensland Government's Medal for the Year of the Built Environment, 2004, and the Queensland Premier's Award for Environmental Services to the building industry. And I finally welcome Perry. Perry Cross, AM, Director and CEO, Accessible Homes Australia. At the age of 19, Perry Cross, AM, was severely injured in a rugby tackle and told he would never walk again. He has since dedicated his life to helping others living with a disability, with a particular focus on research to cure paralysis and accessible housing. Perry founded Accessible Homes Australia, known as AHA, initially for an apartment to meet his own housing needs, before directing new projects to help others, like himself, to live safely and independently in the community. And I believe I can now hand it over to the much more exciting work of what this panel is actually going to talk about through the capable hands of Alison. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, and welcome all. Tonight our learned panel will be discussing livable housing. This is not a discussion about people requiring specialised disability accommodation. Tonight we're talking about inclusive homes, livable homes inclusive of the needs of its occupants, its guests, and through all of life's stages. This is a timely discussion as the new 2022 National Construction Code introduces mandatory livable housing standards in the form of minimum accessibility requirements. Statistically, those who live till they are 80, around 72 of those years are spent indoors, in buildings. And nearly everyone will experience some sort of reduced capacity or physical, cognitive type impairment in their lifetime, albeit temporary or permanent, be it from stress, medication, an illness, an injury, or ageing. Thus, improving and increasing building livability and future-proofing our building stock is not a question of if, but when. And before I start, or we start our discussion, in order for the panellists to better respond to this debate, can I ask for a show of hands of who came this evening for personal interests, i.e. their own home, home of a loved one, so about 5%. Who came health related, so maybe you're a support, in a support role or a carer or allied health, about 2%. Hands raised if you're working directly with the National Construction Code, about all 50%. And if you're involved in the building industry in general, 70%. Great, good to know. So thank you. And tonight's topic, Designing Livable Houses for Life, we'll address 4 key points: the why, what, how, and need. So I'll start. At the age of 42, a cycling accident left me with disabilities. On a beautiful sunny day, I was hit from behind. I didn't see it coming. I couldn't have prevented it, and it could have happened to anybody. As an architect, I discovered our built environment is quite hostile. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, over 700,000 Australians have a brain injury. The daily activity limitations or participation restrictions, 3 of every 4 are under the age of 65. And this is not an uncommon statistic for other disabilities such as spinal cord injury. Unfortunately, many people pre-nursing home or aged care age lack availability or access to accessible, livable housing. Perry, could you share some of your journey in this regard?
Yeah, thank you, Alison, and thanks everyone for coming along tonight. I guess tonight we're here to talk about future-proofing this housing stock of Australia. And some people probably think, well, there's a fairly substantial amount of stock and it all looks pretty good. But as most of us know, when you get down to the crunch of what the housing looks like, it really only suits a limited type of person. But let me take you back. As Amy mentioned in my intro, I was injured playing rugby at the age of 19. At the time, I was a fit, active, healthy person in the community, living in a normal standard house like everyone else. At the time, I was still living at home with mum and dad, and life was pretty cruisy. And then one day I turned up at a rugby match in Brisbane and grabbed the ball from the back of a ruck, ran the ball up, got tackled, and in the ruck that formed, I broke my neck. And in an instant, I was paralysed, laying on the ground, unable to move and unable to feel, and all these sort of terrible, profound things that now lead to me being a C2 ventilated quadriplegic. And it happened in the blink of an eye. There was no sort of warning. There's no sort of tingly feelings. There's no, there's no dress rehearsal. It just happens. And from then, you deal with it. You deal with it. The people on the field deal with it. The trauma that it causes them, and then your family deal with it. The hospital and the health system, and all these people then have to sort of pull together to pick up the pieces. The biggest challenge for me was not only, surviving, but what was going to happen with me. Where was I going to end up? And this is in 1994. This is pre what we, know as the world today. The world is a lot different place now than it was back then. And the real option for me and my family was that I would be moved to a nursing home. And that's what the doctors instructed. My parents would be the housing option for my future. I was 19. A week earlier, I was hanging out with mates, drinking in a pub, playing sport, going for a surf, all those normal things, and in a second, life changes. But it wasn't good enough for my family, and it wasn't good enough for the people around me, my friends. So my mum and dad quickly moved to build a house. In the 8 months that I was in hospital, they got a house ready for me to be discharged back into the community. But that house wasn't perfect. It was just one accessible bedroom with one accessible bathroom and one accessible door. It was just enough for me to get out of hospital. And long story short, I came home and, years went by. My family's, my parents' relationship broke down. They divorced. The house got sold. The house ended up back in the stock of housing available to the community. And that accessibility feature was then lost. I ended up moving in with my sister. I lived with her for about 5 or 6 years. I then tapped my brother on the shoulder and said, "Can I live with you for a few years?" And I shopped myself around, making do and scraping by, I guess. And then I heard about the NDIS, which was rolling out back in 2018, I believe. And I might just invite AJ up. AJ's my carer. I meet AJ, everyone. Just need to have a wiggle every now and then to keep my blood pressure going. So thanks, AJ. Cheers, bro. What's my thought?
The introduction of the NDIS.
The NDIS.
But before that, the previous system
Yeah.
had its limitations.
Yeah, so I guess we were going from a state-based system. So before the NDIS, people like myself were cared for by the states. It was a state responsibility. So you had a health system that sort of supported people like myself. People lived in group homes, traditional group homes. Whether you knew someone or not, your housing option was because you have a disability or you might use a wheelchair, we think you should live with someone else who might have a disability or use a wheelchair. And when you think about that principle, it's a pretty terrible principle. Like, who in their right mind would want to just be shipped into someone's house just because you share a common thing such as a disability? And I'm not saying that doesn't suit some types of people with disability. That's how some people's lives revolve around their mates with similar disabilities and shared experiences. So it does work for some people, but not for everyone. And we shouldn't just cluster people together because you might use a wheelchair. Anyway, we switched in 2018 from a state-based system to a federal system. And at the time I was cheering. It was looking good because it was like, here we go, we've got a great scheme, a beautiful scheme. It's fresh, it can be designed, or it has been designed well, and we can roll it out, and people with disabilities will have choice and control, not just about their supports and who looks after them. I work with AJ because I want to work with AJ, not because AJ said to my house to look after me. I have choice and control around those options. But also for our housing, and when the NDIS rolled out, there was a scheme inside the NDIS, and tonight is not about the SDA, the Specialist Disability Accommodation Scheme. It's just one feature of future-proofing our stock for Australia.
And Perry, I think with the SDA, it's only catering for a small percentage of people that have disabilities.
6% of the people on the NDIS are eligible for the SDA. It's a $700 million annual scheme, but it's only for 6% of the 500,000 people on the scheme. 30,000 people probably. Very small percentage of people. And we need to have stock available for the other 450 odd thousand and the rest of the Australians that are ageing rapidly and, as Alison alluded to, might live with a temporary disability at some point in their lives. They might, roll an ankle or break a leg or something that means that you can't move around your house as you normally would. So future-proofing our stock is imperative. Building national infrastructure that will last generations is vital. Otherwise, people like myself don't have choice and control about where we live. We're forced to cohabitate. The other thing about what we're doing at Accessible Homes is we put people in independent housing options. So they choose where they live. They live, if they want, in their own apartment or their own house or their own villa, but they live nearby someone else with a similar disability, which means they have the option to be able to share their supports. So AJ, can not just help me, for a couple of hours a day. AJ might be able to pop in and say g'day to my next door neighbour who might also need a few hours of support. And there'll be more AJs that are going to help all those people in those houses living nearby. And that's how we get an efficient, affordable NDIS. That's how we roll out efficient, affordable housing. I actually believe that housing is the solution to an affordable NDIS.
And this is probably a good time to bring Barry in, because the 3 A's that we're talking about here of affordability, accessibility and availability touches on the work that Barry's doing with Common Ground and multi-res.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we have none of the 3. We have a shocking undersupply of accessible, affordable and available housing. And it's not just for people who, like Perry, who are in a wheelchair. I have my elderly mother living with me, and she's surprisingly not getting any younger. And she has mobility issues. And those mobility issues are very unlikely to improve. I've been fortunate that I was able to adapt the house quite easily, simply adjusting the entrance to put in a ramp, removing some shower screens, and putting in door handles because she has issues with gripping things with her hands that are easy for her to operate. Fortunately, being a bit of an architect, most of the joinery has press catches, which all she has to do is press on the panels, because I had to have it all nice and sleek and sexy. It will simply pop open for her, and then just applying a bit of pressure, they remain closed. Similarly, all the drawers have electric systems, so there's no ugly knobs. You just simply press them, they open. That wasn't for her, that was for me. And it's just a coincidence that it works beautifully for her. One of the things that, I noticed there's quite a few architects here, and so rather than talk about the sustainability components of the new National Code, we'll probably just focus on the disability components of it. And most of us realise, or at least we should realise, that in every other area of design, we are conscious of accessibility. Every public building. The public components of our residential towers in the city are all accessible. And yet, the consideration of accessibility and for the needs of people long term stops at the entry door. That's nonsense. These codes, these requirements where we have been putting in accessibility ramps, where we've been providing larger parking spaces in basements, whether they be shopping centres, office towers, government buildings or residential buildings, we've been doing this for over 20 years. And yet these considerations stop at the entry door. Now, admittedly, most of the projects I've been involved in over the years have sort of been luxury projects. So they have fairly generous bathrooms and fairly generous circulation spaces. In fact, I usually try to get rid of circulation because I don't think anybody likes to pay 10,000 a square metre for a corridor. They'd rather it be a more useful space. And so most of those projects, it's fairly simple to adapt them. Getting furniture into an apartment is what's tended to govern the size of entry doors and the manoeuvrability. Although I think in anybody designing these things, you'll be aware that we use mobility circles to test whether or not they are accessible at the entry door, but it stops there. And these things don't need to be difficult. It's a very simple exercise to pre-plan for adaptability. If the bathroom is sufficient size, and that's one of the more expensive components of that, simply making sure that you position the fixtures in a location that means that there is the 1200, or depending on what you're aiming for, 1500 millimetres clear space in front of it. That's a very simple thing to do. In many instances, you don't need to make anything bigger. You just need to be aware that as we continue to age, and shockingly, I'm going to age too. In fact, I was recently yelled at by a rather angry young man telling me to learn to drive better, you stupid old, which rather shocked me because I still consider myself very young.
And a good driver.
An excellent driver. These things are very simple to do. They're not expensive. In most cases in high-rise buildings, we actually have shear walls, party walls between apartments that are fire rated for fire separation. So these sort of fixtures, handrails can easily be located. If we think to put the toilet pan next to that wall, not on a lightweight stud wall that then has to be ripped out. And remember, it's not just the cost of relocating a fixture when you're dealing with a high-rise residential building or even a medium-rise residential building. Relocating a toilet to make it more accessible involves ripping out the ceiling of the person below you, going through all the process of getting the approvals from the body corporate and interrupting the life of the person below you. It's an incredibly difficult thing to do. So it's just common sense that we address these things up front. We do it in hotels. We require hotels to have adaptable hotel rooms. We require just about every other form of building within our urban environments to be adaptable. And yet, like I said, adaptability and flexibility ends at the entry door.
I wonder if this is a good time to go to John, because we're starting to get into detail here. Yeah. And John, you've got your head around the nuts and bolts of what this actual new standard is that's coming in. Could you talk about the evolution to getting to where we are? And
yeah, sure. Thank you. So just maybe initially to respond to the issue about the door in the Class 2 buildings. It's because when you cross that door, it's owned by the occupant. Everything else is common property and therefore is open to legislation. Therefore, and being sued. Once you go across the door, it is then that person's problem, and we tend to step back from that as developers. So I think that's the drive. Hotels is a good example, but that's not common property either. Yeah. Or it is common property. Yeah. So if we look at why we've come to the crossroads where we are now, it's had the gestation of an elephant, this whole thing, right? We've been going since 2022. This book...
2002.
2002. This book, which I was lucky enough to have they're as rare as hen's teeth, but this book was put together in 2002 with the cooperation of HIA, MBA, Victorian Government, Queensland Government, Brands in New Zealand, and guess what it's called? Welcome. Design Ideas for Accessible Homes. That was put out, and it's an amazing document, so I'm not going to ask for it. But back in 2002, we were thinking about that. Then we got through to 2010, and Bill Shorten, bless his heart, decided that we needed to do something about the commitment we'd made internationally to fair and equitable treating people with a disability fair and equitably. We signed up international conventions, United Nations conventions, right? But nothing had happened. So in 2010, he said, okay, we commit that by 2020, every new house will be universally designed in Australia. That commitment was endorsed by COA in 2010. And it would be built around universal design principles. Right? So they didn't commit to UD. So then the intention was, over the next 10 years, it would surely be brought in. But in the true political way, they thought, well, 2020 is a long way, so we can kick the can that far, so let's do that, right? So nothing happened except $1 million was made available to set up Liveable Houses in Australia, with the intention that it would be a voluntary uptake and that there would be 3 levels of it. An entry level, an intermediate level, and a high level, which still was below 1428. So the idea was trying to slowly catch a monkey, bring it in to the money. By 2018, the average over the 3 or 4 years either side of before 2018, there was about 150,000 homes built in Australia. And each of the years, we were looking at around 2,000 that were even looking at taking on LHA. The other 140 whatever thousand of them just completely ignored. So what happened was LHA then got drawn into the NDIS, and that sparked a move forward very quickly for it. The government had put money aside and said, there you go, make it happen. But as a construction industry, and I don't think I'm saying anything here, we tend to talk about being over-legislated and over-managed, but we do nothing about it until someone legislates to manage it, right? We don't take it out. It's like when the VAT came in. There were free classes for builders in January of that year, and they were getting 4 and 5 people. But in late June, with it coming in July, they had 5,000 people trying to break down the doors, because we tend to leave it to the end, right? So what has been brought in under 2022, and I think we must not think about it as a separate thing to sustainability, because sustainability is about a building being sustainable. And if you got to knock the bloody thing down for someone else to use it in a different way, it's not sustainable.
And in fact, what I'm finding in my research in regard to cognitive enriched environments is that the baseline for a livable building is a sustainable building.
Correct. And someone who has a hearing impairment or a visual impairment they also have a disability that we need to take. So colour is important, all of those things, spaces, not sharp corners. But to start for the industry, the adoption of the silver level of LHA is a mammoth step forward for them. It's not a big undertaking from a building point of view, but what it does is it starts us thinking about doing the structural stuff, getting the structural stuff in there, being able to get in the door without having to pull it apart as Harry had to do. Wider corridors, because moving corridors is very difficult later on. Trying to get a level hubless shower is very difficult later on. So by putting those things in, you're setting it up for a person with a broken leg, on crutches, 16-year-old who played football and has a broken leg. You try driving a pair of those crutches, really difficult, right? A mum or a dad with twins and one of those, those beautiful prams that are this wide, that crunch in through the door and try and get down the hall, it helps with that. It helps with a lot. It helps with granny coming for the weekend. She can have a wee, she can have a shower, and she can have a sleep. So it is giving us a really usable building. And if we need to upgrade at a later stage, a lot of that stuff is done. Right? So in my experience of probably now 500 LHA certifications as a certifier, I've seen everything from all shapes and sizes and things that happen. And to give you a very, very simple and quick example, is when builders go out and the concreter pours the slab, they start at the outside and they work to the middle. Right? So they line up the studs on the outside, they set up their frames, and they move in. But if that slab happens to be 20, 30, 40 mil too narrow, guess where we lose that? In the corridor in the middle. And therefore, the corridor goes from a metre planned down. Right? So all it takes is someone to say, no, these are the pinch points. We start in the middle, we get these right, and then we don't really care what you do the rest of it. because you get those pinch points. And in looking at those, I also took a bit of a straw poll from about probably 40 or 50 builders who in one of Stockland's projects. And they almost to the dollar say, to provide a house at silver level is about $800. The RIS worked it out, that the government did, worked it out that somewhere closer to $6,500. Now the reason that was because the larger builders, the large project builders who support our industry to probably 70-80% of the houses built, have thousands of drawings that need to be changed. And that was all factored in looking at that figure. A once-off cost, but it was factored in, which took it to a situation where it was $6,000 or $7,000. And that is a deterrent, eh?
$6,000 this year. Next year, once those drawings are modified,
exactly.
cost zero.
So it's a once-off cost. So I think the fear that we have around bringing this in, and you know, it gives you the option to go to gold and go to platinum. Silver's where you bring it in. I mean, the industry is a massive beast. You can't change their appetite. You can't change their menu just at the drop of a hat. It's a big, big ship that takes a long time to turn around. And once we start building around that, like we did when we brought in Natter's star rating for energy in 2003, everyone went, oh, at the end of the world, you know, the sky's going to fall on us. We have to get 3 stars. We have to do this. Within 6 months, I was at a meeting where they were asked, the builders, both the HI and MBA were said, the government said, if this is causing a lot of strife, we'll scrap it. And they said, oh no, don't scrap it. We've just changed everything. So don't scrap it now. We're used to it, and it's fine. And so it's gone, boom. Now at the moment we're saying, oh, we're going to 7 stars. What a lot of people don't know is, in Queensland, in 2018, for the last 4 years, I should say, from 2018 up to 2022, the average house rating in Queensland was 6.6 stars. So going to 7 is taking us 0.4 of a star. And yet everybody's going to say, the world's falling on us. The sky's falling on us.
And I guess for the non-architects and builders in the room, silver, do you want to just touch on exactly what that is?
So silver is very, very simple. There's 7 steps in it, basically. One entry to the house has to be level or with
Step
a 5 mil, no more than 5 mils of step free. One. That can be through the garage, that can be through the front door, it can be any way you want. That's the first one. Second one is corridors have to be, there's one before that, but I'll come back to that because that's the most problematic. So, in the door, corridors have to be 1 metre wide, skirt to skirt. Internal doors have to, when open, allow 820 clear, so it's usually an 870 door. Bunnings, $3 a door. You hang it for the same price, no cost involved. There has to be a toilet on the ground floor, which is fair enough because you don't want people to have to go upstairs to go to the loo if they're anything. Toilet on the ground floor that meets certain requirements. Yeah. Right, bands like
1,200 clear and
1,200, 600, 900, and the walls reinforced. A shower that is capable of being screen taken down and a published thing. The reinforcing in the walls, and then if it's a set of stairs, it just needs to have a continuous handrail. Now, the NCC wants us to have that continuous handrail now as nominated anyway, so that one doesn't count. So, it's something. So, I've done a lot of work with the government on these, and we've got 300 lots going right now, affordable housing, 300 lots. They're all silver level, but a lot of them. Most of the showers are upstairs because they're small blocks in end, so they have to go upstairs. But the logic is that to them, once they got their head around it, it was great. And house and land package for 430,000. Exactly what you want. It's not 430 million, 430,000. So I think there's a lot of spooking going on around it, but I think this is the start of the journey. If we can get this right, it'll then become part of one. And class 2, the same. That'll be exactly the same. Yeah. How they're going to administer the whole thing is interesting. That's still up for grabs and is being discussed at the moment. But the one that I didn't mention in the beginning was a it was a compliant metre-wide pathway from the boundary to the point of entry. And that is the one that's caused most stress. But they haven't thought about the fact that you can actually drive into your garage and come through the door. So you don't actually need to have, if you can't make it, you don't have to have that. So the one big stumbling block is actually not a stumbling block at all. It's actually quite easily rectified. So, moving forward, this is our opportunity. And so build from here into gold, into platinum, and send this back.
And Coral, I know you've been doing research into home modification and looking at the cost of delaying making these changes.
A number of the things I wanted to talk about have already been talked about, so that's good. I might just stick with anecdotes more than hard facts. But I guess further to what John was just describing, a lot of these changes that are at the silver level, which is what's being legislated now, are very common sense issues, and they're about creating the potential for adaptability in housing. They're not about creating universally designed housing. They're not about creating housing that will be accessible for Perry to live in. They are the bare minimum of what is required for houses to be able to be adapted easily. I've been doing some work recently talking to a number of different people who've had to have home modifications made to their house for a number of different reasons, and the issue of adaptable housing isn't for old people or people with a disability, it's for all of us. And if you think about the way that the architecture discourse talks about good design and good housing design, it's about houses that are flexible and adaptable over the course of our lifetime to changing family circumstances, multi-generational housing, all of those sorts of things. This isn't anything that's out of this world for an architectural audience. So this legislative change, I guess, is about, it's not about bringing in best practice, it's about legislating out worst practice. And I do hope that it's the start of an incremental journey, the same that we've seen with the energy rating, where we started at 3-star and we went from there. Silver, some of those 7 steps that John mentioned in silver are things that would, if the people that I've been talking to who've had to had home modifications made had houses with these things, their home modifications process would have just, we wouldn't have even need to have an interview or a conversation because it just would have been a non-event. The reinforced walls in bathrooms, for example, someone needs to install a grab rail or a shower chair or something like that. I mean, it's not hard to understand that a couple of extra pine studs behind the tiling, behind the drywall, doesn't really cost a lot, but pulling out all of that tiling, putting in 3 additional studs, retiling the whole wall and then installing the grab rail is suddenly a $10,000, $20,000 exercise. Similarly, the showers, the issue of the ability to have a shower that is a step-free entry to the shower is something that every second person that I've talked to who's had to do that to their home has ended up with plumbing issues, or builders who haven't done it particularly well, or ended up with bathrooms that are unsafe because the falls aren't right, and so everything's wet all of the time and creates a slip hazard. And just thinking about, those changes to the silver level about being able to install grab rails, being able to install shower chairs, being able to have step-free entries. When you think about that in the context of ageing in place, they're the kind of preventative modifications that can be made to prevent a lot of the injuries that we associate with ageing. The fall and the broken hip that ends up with someone having to be put in a nursing home earlier than they would have liked to, and the disruption to the family that causes. So it is, it's for people who have impairments, whether that be permanent or temporary. It's for people who plan to age at some point in their life, Barry, it's for you. And it's also about trying to keep people in their homes, in their community, with their people, and keep them connected to their social world, because part of what can lead to, really negative outcomes is when there's that social disruption to people's lives, when, whatever's happened with the housing situation has meant some massive disruption to their life. And you can imagine what the toll that has on people's mental health. You know, another aspect of home modifications in terms of people that I've been talking to is anything that allows somebody to have an increased level of independence in their own home means that they're not relying on whether it be paid care support or informal care support from family members and things like that. We've seen that there's a direct link between well done home modifications and family members' abilities to participate in full-time employment, for example.
Well, I have an example of that. I injured my leg at Easter. I was in hospital for some period, and then all the rehab hospitals were full, so I had to go into short-term accommodation. And I think a month in STA was about $24,000.
Yes.
And I was, several months because I was unable to go back to my home. So there is a real cost, not just to not modifying our buildings sooner, but also to our lifestyle. But
if I may, I have a similar experience in that my mum has had a couple of falls in the last 2 years, but she's able to be at home with me, so it's not particularly disruptive to my life. I can deal with her, I can make her dinner, I can check up on her in the evening. It's very straightforward, whereas my cousin, his mother is now having to be in a nursing home because she's just simply not able to be accommodated at home with him. And that means he spends his time driving across the city because finding an affordable care centre was just too difficult in the area where they were. So his day comprises of getting up, going to work, then going to see his mother, gets home late in the evening. His quality of life is far worse than mine simply because where they live is just not suitable for her to live at home with him.
And I imagine she probably feels a lot more miserable than she's been able to move in with her son, for example.
And to add to that, the alternative for someone in my situation or similar might be readmission to a hospital. And a daily charge for someone in my situation is about $3,000 a day. And I remember my specialist telling me when I was back in hospital that it's probably cheaper for me to go and live at the Sheraton in the penthouse than it is to stay here in this hospital.
You take them up? I wouldn't have dropped an offer at that.
Just on those types of costs, interestingly, coincidentally yesterday, I was talking to some colleagues who work in the rehab unit at the spinal ward at the PA hospital. So they're the sort of hospital that deal with the majority of spinal cord injuries in Queensland. And so I was talking to the people who are in the team that are responsible for discharging people home, getting them into their homes, getting homes modified or finding new accommodation for those people. And they're talking about all the problems that they have with we don't have enough beds available. We have people who are ready to discharge and go home that are occupying a bed that someone who's had a car accident, had surgery and is sitting in ICU can't get rehab because we can't get this person out of their bed and back into the community. And, I was sort of saying, well, at least there's this change to the construction code coming in now, and it will be for new built dwellings, not renovations of existing dwellings, but new built dwellings.
New construction. Depending on the state will interpret the code.
Yeah.
But so new buildings and extensions, additions.
Yeah.
It's worth noting some states are not taking it up.
Yeah.
Some states have decided they won't do it. So that still shows that, and the demonisation of it is really quite annoying in that what I used to hear all the time is, well, I'm 23 years of age and me and my girlfriend are buying a house. We don't want to talk about accessibility and being old and having free work building frame or being in a wheelchair. So the demonisation was, well, don't worry about that, don't mention the war.
The 23-year-olds who are buying a house are getting a first homeowner's grant.
Yeah.
I read a statistic last week that in the course of 1 year, and I may be wrong on this, but there's $3 million worth of first homeowners grant, of money that is going towards first homeowner grants. Bill Shorten was on the radio last week talking about this issue that Perry mentioned about the problem of people who need to be in hospital at $3,000 a night, and there's an estimate that on any given night in Australia there's 1,500 people across the country in that situation, and that is costing taxpayers $3 million per night.
Yeah.
First homeowner grants are $3 million per year.
I'm sorry, I just want to take it in a slightly different direction.
Yeah, well, I was
sorry.
just thinking maybe if we all do this,
I just
we
want to
pay
take it in a
less
very
tax.
slight direction. The old adage of you sell the sizzle, not the sausage, is so applicable in this situation. Because if you have first of all, you take any, I would take any of you now, if it was available, I'd take you through a silver level and I'd take you through a non-silver level. And I would be willing to put a couple of $1,000s on the table to say you will not pick the difference. There is no foreseeable, you cannot make the difference, except the only thing we'll give it away is to say, that's a really much better idea with the shower than having a step. Right? That's what you would pick. And
It looks better.
and all of those top-end ones you've built, there was no bloody hobs in them.
Absolutely
right?
not.
So it works, and it works for the rich. So that's the first thing, is that you would take people. But the other thing is you say to that person, by 2025, 1 in 4 people in this country will be over 65. That's a big statistic. So I'm investing, the average person lives in the house for 7 years. In 7 years' time, I'm going to be selling my house. The likelihood is I'm going to be selling to someone over 65. And they're going to go, lovely house, but holy shit, look what we got to do to make it work for us. So you turn around to the young people and you say, buy this, you won't even notice the difference, but when you put it on the market,
Yeah, got it.
people will grab it at a premium. When they brought in the star rating in Canberra, now nearly 20 odd years ago, right, within 5 years, a 5-star home, the top you could get then, as opposed to a 3-star, was getting 20% premium in resale. 20%. So immediately the market looked and said, well, it's going to cost me a lot less to run because it's a 5-star as opposed to 3-star, so I'd buy that one instead of buying that one. And they're willing to pay a premium for it.
As soon as real estate agents understand it as a selling
And the whole
point,
problem is education. We're not teaching, we're not telling people.
I want to go back to the gradual point because I want to have a conversation now about what we want this to be like. Because really the silver, we're barely scratching the surface. And I know 20 years ago or even, back in the 90s, the Institute of Architects ran a course, a 1-year certificate on aged care design. And in that it included, the heights of your PowerPoints, so much more than just having a wider corridor. And so I know in this code it talks about the base of silver, gold is optional. But I think we need to be looking beyond.
Yeah, I think so, but if history tells us anything, is that the wheels of the NCC and the ABCB moves quite slowly.
legislation is 20 years behind reality.
So what will happen is they'll bring it in now, and probably in the 2030 they'll make gold, and probably in 2035 they'll make it platinum. But the key thing is, if people start looking, the advantage in what they're doing and bringing it in is those that will adopt it because they see it. So people will go, that's a great idea, but I want to go higher than that. Right? Yeah. So those 2,000 I told you that were LHA certified of the 150,000, the biggest cohort was silver. Was gold. Because people look and go, well, I don't want the bottom and I don't want the top, I'll have the middle. So by default, everybody will grab it on to gold. That's what will happen. Nobody will build silver. They'll all want gold. So they'll go in and say, well, this is silver. And they say to the salesperson, so what would it take it to gold?
So, John, I can jump forward a few years for you because I live in a platinum standard house, which has got every bell and whistle you can imagine. It's fully voice controlled. So for someone in my situation, I can turn on the lights, change the temperature on the air conditioner, open the blinds in the morning when I wake up. I can change the channel on the TV. It's very expensive to have AJ standing there flicking through the Netflix channels while I make up my mind. So all these things are technologies that will come for standard houses in the future. We've got to be thinking ahead.
You're dead right, but there won't ever be a technology, Perry, that allows us to move the walls.
No.
I mean,
Yes.
an extra 300 minutes. So that's the key thing, get the structure
Yes,
right.
and an app is not going to fix
An app
the
isn't
problem
going
of
to
a
fix that.
shower
But
that
you're
doesn't
dead
drain
right.
properly.
You're dead right. If you can find your way around that house comfortably, then all the rest of it can be clipped onto it. But you can't clip on wider corridors without demolition.
I think that what we're going to find is the end user part of the market is always the drag in these things. Like if you have a look at the green building standards and how they've been implemented with office buildings, it's the asset owner who is driving the innovation. It's not the regulatory stick, it's them seeing that it costs more to operate.
Yes.
There are more operational, it costs more to maintain. It's more of a problem if they don't aspire to the higher Green Star standards.
Yes.
And then what happens is the tenants aspire to these things as well. So, for example, with common grounds, we need to because we'll be the asset owner of that facility, we need to build it in a way that is not going to cost us the earth to run, so it has to be sustainable. We need natural cross ventilation, we need appropriate solar access. It has to be sustainable also from a psychological and neurological point of view. It needs to have access to greenery and all those sort of things, because we're going to own this for 20 to 30 years and be operating it. We don't want to be coming back having to retrofit things. And also it has to be flexible. We can't start tearing down walls and rearranging things in a high-rise building because we didn't take the steps to look into the future. So, you know, reducing the energy costs, reducing water consumption, all the things that we know are going to become increasingly expensive, while maintaining a good quality of life. And looking forward, the homeless community is not getting any younger either. I mean, there is a large cohort of young men in there, 18 to 35, usually with substance issues. But, you know, we have an awful lot of older people becoming homeless, and their needs need to be pre-planned as the community continues to age.
There has to be a driver to it too. So I've been in sustainability for nearly 30 years now, and the biggest shot in the arm over that 30 years was COVID. Because what happened was people were working from home. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they're saying, "Christ, this place is hot." They were never there. They were in the office, right? And then by the time they got home, it was cool. So suddenly they went, "We need to do something about this. How much money do we spend on these air conditioners?" Because they ran them all the time. They looked at the bill and went, "Whoa, look at that."
Yeah, and Barry, I'm going to pull you up and say it's not that the end user, the difference between the asset owner and the tenant as end user.
Yes, that's true.
Is the difference. Because if you think about that from housing, and, you know, I'm obviously wading through the stuff around home modifications, homeowners who own a detached dwelling, you know, have cost implications to do modifications, but can do modifications if that is financially viable for them. Renters, I just have so many more hurdles and have consistently worse outcomes. And it's not that, you know, only homeowners need their houses modified. You know, this is going to be, you know, the housing affordability game is different.
But
you notice that institutional investors, like the build-to-rent projects, they are looking ahead to the future as well, at energy costs and flexibility and adaptability.
And they have mandated percentages of silver.
Because they're going to on-sell some of that stuff too. And those buying it are going to say, well, I'm going to carry this asset for a number of years. What interesting you're saying is that from the Green Star point of view, the tool in the Green Star that was lowest taken up was class 2, was apartments. Because the developer looked and thought, well, if I'm going to spend an extra $1 million on the build to make it sustainable, I'm going to hand all that value
don't pay those
across.
bills.
Well, I'm going to hand that over when I sell strata type and sell the block the unit. So I'm not doing it. And that was it was really interesting. Now the pressure of industry is making it work.
Sorry, Perry, you were going to...
I was just going to add to Barry's comment about, you know, energy cost. It's not just cost, it's supply. And that's the other thing we have an issue with it, moving towards is the supply of energy, the consistency of our power and batteries, and those sort of technologies are imperative for someone in my situation, because I don't go very well or very long without any power.
The reliability. I'm conscious that we've got a little bit of time left. I don't know if there are any questions in the room, because we're happy to keep on talking.
Good evening. My question around like the silver and gold levels and all that sort of thing. Do the houses need to be almost like serialised or have a register? Because let's say in 4 years' time you go to buy a second-hand house. How do you know if it complies or not? All the stuff's on the wall. Unless you pull the gyprock out, how are you going to know?
There is a certification process.
There is, but it won't
It's
be
voluntary.
applicable. It won't be applicable because it's a really good question because if you do certifications, it takes someone to go out there that can measure up a completed house for silver level. It takes you about an hour and a half to do it properly, and certifiers won't do that. So right now there's a group of people around. There's a group of people being chosen by the ABCB who are working as a cohort at the moment to work out how they're going to actually manage all those processes because it is hanging out there a little bit. But I would suggest to you that the certificate, if it's 2022 certified and onwards, it has to be. So you, when you're buying it, you'd say, so when was the house built? Oh, it was built in 2018.
Yeah, but the consumer's got to know to ask that question. Do you know what I mean? Like the consumers.
But hopefully they will. Hopefully they will if we educate them.
What are your thoughts, John, on Domain and realestate.com providing a feature on their website that says accessibility and, having a market?
That will happen when it has a value.
When there's demand. I am
So they
very
put stars
suspicious of real estate agents. Last week I
Why?
spoke.
How would you be?
I understand that everybody else shares this topic.
Lovely people.
No, last week I spoke to somebody who was looking, one of these home mods, people working with people with spinal injury. They're looking for a rental. They're talking to real estate agents. Rentals in Brisbane are just a nightmare for everybody at the moment. And so then they're trying to find one that has a degree of accessibility and they're like, it needs to be step-free, the person's in a wheelchair. The real estate agent gives them an option and says, yeah, this house, everything inside is stepless, the shower is stepless and everything, and the picture of the front door has 3 steps in front of it. And it was sort of like, well, what can you get in? And it's like, oh, once you're inside, it's stepless. And so sorry, Perry, I am very...
In defence of real estate agents, with large apartments, I have had real estate agents been telling me for 15, almost 20 years, don't do 2-storey apartments. Or if you do a 2-storey apartment, make sure you've got a master bedroom with a walk-in robe and an ensuite on the lower floor. Because if you're old enough to afford a penthouse, you're going to be aware of the fact that you don't want to be negotiating stairs for the rest of your life. So there is an awareness at that level, and I think it's a very good question. People need to understand that on new build projects, anything from now on is going to be silver. It's a requirement. So if people who are in the market and who perhaps already, like is the case with my mother, has an elderly mother living with them, and is looking to relocate, well, we know we need a new build, or we've got to spend a bit of time researching the property and making sure that it is either suitable now or is easily adaptable. And the likelihood is people aren't going to want to go to the effort of working out whether it's adaptable. They're going to be looking for that new build.
Yeah, it's interesting because, being in the NCC doesn't necessarily mean to say it's people are going to ask about it. I mean, they don't go in and say, what height is the handrail? Right? No. They'll only ask the height of the handrail if they have kids that are great climbers. Right? So it's a matter of thinking about, okay, tell me more about this. And I think we just need we need the industry to get behind it. And I worked with Jennings for a number of years, many years ago. And believe me, real estate, new home salespeople, they are constantly looking for an edge. What can I offer that the others aren't? So all you got to do is say to them, look at this one, look at this little beauty. Right? And that's exactly what they did with the energy. Ours is 4 stars and theirs is 3 stars. So they're going to save you millions of dollars a year. I mean, they exaggerate everything, but the client, they tell them what they want to hear. So, that will change, I think, then over a period of time. But it's probably not a bad idea. The stamping from an LHA way is probably the best way to do it. But the market isn't going to wear that. They just won't.
Because of the cost.
Because of the cost associated.
But a real estate agent will tell you if it's pet friendly.
Yeah.
So
I've recently bought an apartment.
They say, look how lovely and wide these corridors are.
I recently bought an apartment in February in Brisbane and asked the real estate agent about the flood zone. and it flooded in March, and he assured me it was not in the flood zone. And I checked the flood maps and said, actually, and
so now we're getting to the bottom, but that's why you don't like
no, I already knew. I knew that it was in the not high likelihood, and then he flat out told me it wasn't, and I was like, that's a lie.
He told you you'd have your own personal pool. It'd be only there in March.
I think we're going to go to our next question.
Hi, Emma Greenhalgh. I'm with National Shelter, and I guess maybe just more of a comment, but I'm just really pleased that you brought up about private renting in this discussion, given that currently 30% of people will be renting over their life course, and particularly as the tenancy legislation, if you need minor modifications, you've got to seek that approval, and then you have to pay for them to be, rectified. So I'm just really pleased that we're...
And in addition to that, a lot of funding bodies that fund home modifications will only provide funding if you have a 5-year lease, for example, which is not common at all. So renters are really behind the eight ball.
Yeah. So I just sort of wanted to make that note, and really pleased that this is a tenure neutral discussion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. One in the front. Paul.
Thank you. Just going back to that other point about the code, I mean, I think there is an issue, and it's almost the kind of, occasionally real estate agents have been known to exaggerate, if not lie. Yes, it's accessible, and you can see 3 steps in the photo.
Apologies if there's any.
But we've got a construction code that says you're not allowed to clad high buildings in flammable material. But we've got, so getting the code is good. Enforcing the code, I'm part of a research project where we're looking at how the different built environment professions work together to ensure that the end product is what it says on the tin, is what the architect specified, is what a reputable certifier signed off on, is what the construction engineer approved and everything else, because, unfortunately I don't know what the percentage is, but there are cases, you go to Opal Tower or wherever, where it's not the case. So getting the code is good, ensuring the code is achieved and respected, and having trust that, because you've got something that says that, you can trust and rely on that when you make your purchases is another thing.
Absolutely.
I mean, project home builders are a very powerful force in this. And they, without a question, will. I mean, the reason we're not bringing NC 22 is that part of NC 22 isn't coming in until October next year. It's to give them the time to move their stock and to bring in new stock, right? So, I can't imagine how many thousands of people go through those every weekend. So it's going to become quite a high, and they're going to say, look at this. This is a nice entry. You notice you don't have a step in. So I think that will pick it up really, really, really quickly. And of course, they're not allowed to display something, a solid part, anything in the display that is not permanent. That's permanent. Put in, the old days you put a fireplace and you say, oh no, that's an extra. They can't do that anymore. So if they have a level threshold or they have a hobblers, it has to go into the house unless the client particularly asks to have it taken out. And if they do in this case, they won't be able to get certification. So it's a really interesting change.
And you can see how apartment developers are pitching high quality apartments to boomers who are downsizing, for example. This is just going to be another badge on that process for those developers.
I'm conscious we should bring it to a close.
Okay.
So I've got one question for each of you, and that would be, what would be the take-home message that you would like people to take home with them from this discussion?
Well, certainly for people who, do have people who they need to care for, or are likely to be caring for somebody in the future, these are things you need to be very conscious of if you're changing homes or relocating. I gave the example before of my cousin and his mother, which is my mother's sister. To get her into that aged care facility cost $650,000 to buy that. Now, it's one of those facilities that will, as her needs increase right through to the end of her life, they are available within that facility. That's $650,000 he had to find. $650,000 I don't have to find, because my house, fortunately, is easily adaptable. These are things that we need to be cognizant of as the population ages, and unfortunately, it's going to happen to all of us. So we should be embracing this straight away and spreading the awareness. I mean, architects, we've known all this forever. Sustainability, we even knew about sustainability back in the days of the dinosaurs when I was a student. We knew about orientation, ventilation and insulation. We knew about that then. We're lousy at communicating this. We have lots of talks with each other about it, but what we don't do well enough is we don't communicate it to the wider community and to the general public. That's why we need Gold Coast Open House. But there's a lot of people who aren't here tonight that really need to hear these stories. The Institute has made efforts to educate people in schools, but really we still have not been able to have the impact that we need to have in order to raise people's expectations, because if the expectations are higher, then the industry will have to deliver. And as a matter of principle, I'm opposed to regulation because I'm a libertarian. However, they have come in so handy to me over the years because they allow me to force people who don't want to do the right thing to do the right thing. Well, and I know that it's cheaper to do it that way, but you have to do it because here's the rule. So unfortunately, they've been incredibly helpful. They have great utility. And this, as we progress and increase the standards, it'll be helpful to us architects when we're dealing with people who simply don't want to do it because they don't see the value in it or they think that it's going to cost more.
Coral. I think that my take-home message would be that the fact that this has made it into legislation is the result of a couple of decades of really solid work by a number of different advocacy groups. And, that's the legacy that they've provided. And I personally am grateful, and I think the population as a whole should be quite grateful. However, we have the vast majority of housing stock is currently wildly inaccessible. This will only bring in silver level, and it will only bring in new buildings from this year onwards, or next year onwards, whenever it is. We are still going to have the vast majority of building stock wildly inaccessible. So this is a starting point, and I hope that it is the point where we start really shifting the needle.
John.
Thank you. I was going to recognise the work of people like Margaret Ward over the years that have just been amazing what they've done.
And persistent.
And professional. But I think this is a credit to them.
Yes.
That's the first thing. Secondly is I think we have to embrace this now and say, this isn't a massive titanic change. This is just logical building practice.
Yeah.
And when I hear people turn around and say, well, you've got to tell us how to do it because the builders won't do it. And they don't know how to do it.
Builders build what's needed.
But these are people in the associations telling me this, and I'm saying, well, you don't really have much respect for your members. Builders are really, really creative people, and they can get around things that you and I would never even think of. So this isn't a challenge to them. This is just another thing they have to do. So we just need to stop demonising it. We got to say it's here, fantastic, and let's just get on with doing it properly and trying to voluntarily lift it higher than where it is. And after a while, we'll obviously sit down and say, imagine we had a meeting about this. We all got together and talked about this instead of 5 years ago. Look at it now. It's part of what we do. So I think it's great.
I would say, think about your own situation. Could you invite me over to your house for, a cup of tea? Would it work for me to come to you? And some of you will probably say no. There's too many stairs, or there's, whatever it is. So, if we want a truly inclusive society, this is the evolution. We've got to end the discrimination and the separation and segregation. So we're working towards that inclusivity.
On that point, I spoke to somebody recently who was talking about inviting a friend of theirs and realising in a social circle, inviting that the majority of the people in this friendship group, the only room that was accessible for that friend to visit at their house was the garage. And that said a lot about what we prioritise when we design our homes.
Yeah. So on that note, hopefully we'll all go home with a social responsibility to our fellow man and have more livable houses and livable communities and cities. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Coral. Thank you, John. And thank you, Perry.
Thanks, Alison.
Thank you, Alison.
over to Amy to tell us about that drink.
Exactly. I realise that I'm standing between you and a lovely drink over there, which I can see. All right. So yes, again, thank you, Alison. Thank you, Barry, Coral, John, and Perry. That conversation was just so valuable. And I'll take that away with me. Look, a couple of things. I didn't realise we spent 72 years inside. I think we better do a better job with all of our buildings, especially our houses. And $24,000 a month for an SDA, I had no idea some of those costs. But what's really confronting was that legislating out worst practice. We can do better than that, okay? Yeah. So thanks for some of the, and all of the rest of it. All right, now, also thank you for this wonderful, insightful audience and the brilliant questions that we had. Thanks to all of you for that. The Gold Coast Open House, the committee and the volunteers are tireless. Well, they're not tireless. They do get tired, but they work tirelessly, and I really want to thank them for that. And the volunteers that help out. And HOTA, they've welcomed us with this beautiful venue. They are also steadfast in their commitment to our celebration of architecture with this festival. And finally, of course, our sponsor. and I have a few words from our sponsor, and I'll keep them quick. But yes, on behalf of the Institute, I wanted to share 3 quick things with you. One is we are actually actively involved in contributing to the Housing Summit. Any of you that actually have any ideas, find us, send us your notes. Look, it's overwhelming and it's quick, but we'll do our best. Also, you're obviously architecture enthusiasts. We've got this beautiful regional symposium coming up. It's entitled, quite appropriately to the discussion, Regional Futures, a Collaborative Perspective. It's on Durrumbal Country. It's in the coastal town of Yeppoon in Great Central Queensland. It's in October. I've forgotten the date. Sorry about that. Look, architects and architectural enthusiasts are most welcome. You don't have to be an architect to go. We'd love to see you there. I think the atmosphere is going to be really kind of friendly and regional and unique. And you can explore and celebrate architecture again. And on a more local level, and kind of speaking to the architects in the room, I'm having lunch with you guys on the 25th of October, so look it up, because that's my chance as president to say hello to you. And even though I come from the Gold Coast, I think there's a lot of you I haven't met yet, and certainly ones that I'd like to reconnect with. So look, I'm really looking forward to that. Now, we're nearly there. No. So let's take notes with that. No, we have some upcoming events. Here we go. Alrighty, I don't know if I'm going to get it timed right, but let me just go through them. So on Monday, we have Shored Up, When Human Nature and the Force of Nature Collide. Film at HOTA, that's starting at about 7. Well, at 7, I think. On Tuesday, there is Good Design Without Deep Pockets. This is a panel discussion. I'm actually going to be back for that one. Creating cost-effective architecture from backyard extensions to share houses and affordable homes, panel discussion right here, 6 o'clock. I'll be similar to what Alison was doing this evening, so thanks for that little example. And then we have another panel discussion on the next night, Nowhere to Grow, Designing Green Spaces in a Towering City, also right here, 6 o'clock. And finally, on the Sunday, 16th of October, film and discussion on Sunday. I'm not sure if I got that right. And there's so much more. There's actually an app, there's a website. Get into it, discover it. And now, the words you've been waiting for. Good evening, good conversation, and good design to you all. Good night.